Greg, welcome to L&D Disrupt. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Me too, me too. The plan today is to discuss how we can create our best learning experiences by building a really solid, effective foundation. Before we get into all of that, do you mind telling people a bit about who you are, what it is that you do, and the types of companies you normally work with?
Sure. I have been in learning for somewhere between 10 and 13 years. I can never really remember exactly. Um, but largely all my experience has been around social and experience design. So thinking largely about not just hitting obvious models that people use for leadership and skills and behavior, but trying to think more about how people actually learn in real life, real things they do. Um, I've worked with BP, ASOS, HSBC, Philip Morris, and currently with doing some work with British Airways, which is really exciting. Trying to help them change their approach to learning and trying to think about it more in a kind of they're using 5DI, but also more of a social way as well. So that's really exciting. And in terms of products, it's the age-old thing for me. How to create good products is spending time with your users, looking at your data, but really doing those things rather than just I've expect 4 people. It's like, okay, great. So thinking about how can we get people engaged where we don't own their time or attention. So how can we genuinely get them engaged? Where you're not having to do something kind of jazzy just to get that initial hook, but how can you get them long-term engaged? So part of all of this is I've created a process that I'm basically deploying into BA at the moment and using with some other clients that speeds all that up and is incredibly user focused, but it's also business focused. It needs to work for both at the same time.
Awesome. Yeah, I think engagement is a great point there. I've been having this conversation a few times recently and defining what engagement actually means, to your point around um, trying to make it jazzy. Actually, is engagement just this allows me to do my job better, then I am engaged, or
Yeah,
this actually fits the company culture and values and mission. So of course I'm engaged because it's in service of something else. So
yeah,
yeah, I love that. And I know having seen sort of the full framework and the process you're talking through, that people would find a lot of value in it. And we're going to really nail that first part today because that is where we're setting a big foundation for success. You
absolutely.
touched on it briefly there about the fundamentals to build these good products, services, and experience. But I wonder if you can maybe explain that in a bit more detail, because you did mention context there, and I think it's really important to really nail that. But anything else that really is a fundamental when you have to build a great product or service?
Yeah, and I think you can put it down to 2 things. Um, so I mentioned about understanding your users and your data, but the first thing for me is understanding the problem. So I've heard a lot of people across different companies it's almost uh, like a Columbo, oh, just one more thing kind of approach where they go, but is it even learning? And you go, probably, yeah, that could be a question that you ask someone. But if someone has already defined, maybe not the entire problem they're talking about is learning, but some of it is learning, or if it is the whole problem, wherever it is on the scale, you've really, really got to understand the problem or the situation you're in. So whilst that might sound a bit buzzwordy about, get your problem statement right and all the rest of it, um, as part of the process, we've created this almost like family tree template for people. So you almost start with the earliest ancestor at the top. That's your main problem, and then you start to break it down. So each family member beneath that then has breaks out into them, into them, into them, and you're just breaking that problem down into a couple of small components, and then into those small components. So you don't try and attack the ultimate problem on its own. You start to think about, where do I have the skill and ability, and where are the quick wins? Where do I bring people in? Do I need to attack a family member over here to get to a family member over there in terms of the problem statement? And always trying to think about, if you don't understand all of those things, you're probably going to miss stuff out. And if you start to miss stuff out, whilst you could say, so it's a bit like, I don't know, if you were building a stadium of some kind, like, right, we've got everything done, but if you've missed out something as basic as the seats, you've just got a load of people standing there, then they're all falling down the stairs, or there's just one big slope of concrete and they're all trying to balance up. You could have the greatest everything else, but just little details like that could be missed.
Yeah.
Same with your learning problem as well. Like, you could have something that's great early doors but doesn't have longevity.
Yeah.
And then again, the second part for me is, to a degree, forgetting everything you've done before. So treating every problem as unique, treating every business you're working with, at least from the way I work with different businesses, treating every business as unique. If you're working in the same company, then still treat every problem as unique. But fresh eyes is a thing for when you're doing design of any kind, whether you're creating music or art or learning design or whatever it is you're creating. Taking some time away from it, coming back to it a day later, just bringing someone else in that hasn't seen it and gone, "What's your first thoughts on this?" So some problems will share the same characteristics, and we talk about this in the process around product characteristics and how your product can tell a story, but there also needs to be a story that relates to the people you're trying to either sell or impart that product on people, the people trying to impart it to. So, but for you and I, we're two different people, so we could deal with the same problem very, very differently. Or how do we define a universal solution that works for multiple different people? So again, you always go back to your problem. Where will you win? Where will you not win? How do you scope something out to a point where you can say, I'm fairly confident or above fairly confident, say, let's get an MVP out, let's make it work, and then everything else will fall into place after that. But there's a whole process in between
Yeah.
from me to be there. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I really like that point around having the same characteristics because I think sometimes we assume the same thing is the same problem. So,
yeah,
for example, if 2 years in a row we need to do an engagement survey, or 2 years in a row we need to send this sequence of emails out, we treat it as the same problem because, of course, there's value in looking at what we did last year.
yeah.
But is it exactly the same problem? Does it just have some of the same characteristics? Do we need to take a new approach and fresh eyes, like you say? And I think people across every industry fall into that trap of it worked last year, let's do it again, but without saying, does it just have some similarities? But actually, it's slightly a different problem this time around.
Well, this is it, and it's the same with consumer products. So, like, I always use it like iPhones. Phones in general probably is the better example there. Like, my wife is an Android user. I'm an Apple user. We'll sit and have these petty debates about who's got the best camera and whatnot. But then there are, the more than one or two types of phone. Largely, they all do the same thing. You can make phone calls if people still do that. You can send your emails. You can go on your social apps. You can do your banking. You can do little bits and pieces, and there's other things you can do. Obviously, they all pretty much do the same thing. So why is there such a market and such a, not just for creation of them, but development of them, the social kind of angst of some people going, you shouldn't have this type of phone, you're wrong, and all the rest of it, and why are some, a couple $100, why are some a couple of thousand, when they all do the same thing? Same with cars, same with houses, same with everything else. Like, again, it's coming back to what's the story, what's the narrative, what's the product characteristics that you are selling, and is it to the same audience, or are you saying it's the same thing but we've tweaked it so the same thing to a degree can go to two very, very vastly different audiences? And again, it always comes back to, if you haven't figured out your problem or your audience, you're just guessing. And if you're just guessing, go home.
Yeah. Yeah, to that point, you mentioned about this kind of the stigma around brands or the love for brands, and actually, that's why you can't always roll out the same thing because you might have done something at a different company that works, but you come into this company and in this context, they did a really similar thing 2 years ago and it didn't work, and everyone has such a negative perception of it. So you
Mm-hmm.
do really have to be like blank canvas about defining the problem, and I really like that mindset.
Absolutely, absolutely.
In this early stage, I know you have this great idea of the project intake so you can understand things like the problem, but also the people involved and the expected outcome. So, yeah, tell
Mm.
us more about this idea of the project intake.
Sure, sure. So it covers a load of different, I say a load of, about three or four different parts in the process there. So obviously there's a whole section about defining your problem, and with the family tree. Then we also talk about stakeholders in terms of um, who are they, and then we start to map them out around where would they sit on a very basic grid, as in, are they interested but not available, and then all sorts of different versions of that. And it's meant to be a very, very quick exercise where it, I've seen it 1,000 times where people have gone, these 4 or 5 people are your stakeholders because they all have a vested interest. And vested interest seems to be the phrase that seems to be banded around a lot. Stakeholder number three could have a vested interest and could genuinely be your most important stakeholder, but they are so in the weeds with something else that the thing you're working on, you know, they might give you 10 minutes over the whole year because they're just busy, not because they're a bad person. But then you could have someone else that's stakeholder number two, for example, might want to give you all of the hours every day, be really, really involved because they're really, really like engaged and want to be engaged, but they have no clue. They have no sway in the project either. So if anything, they're just sucking your time. It's a bit of a time sink. So it's trying to figure out who would you work with and how would you work with each of them in terms of your stakeholders. What are they actually going to do for you? And ultimately, what are you going to do for them? And then collectively, sounds a bit cheesy, but what will you collectively do for your users? Because that's what you're creating something for. It's not for you, it's not for them, it's for the end users. And then we start to talk about a bit more around that, around framing the problem for the users. So you've got your business version, you've got your end user version, and how would you bring all of that together so you can then start to plan out what you're going to do, as in looking at your data capture, what data is relevant to get, what is not really relevant to get, where's the best use of your time spent, do you have a rough window of time of when the people you need to work with are available, and also do you know who those people are? So it's then starting to figure out, and we've got this on the, I'll show you the process. On the top right of every screen, there is a series of categories of people, and some of them are grayed out because some of them aren't needed for every single step, and some of them are. So it's about making sure you're bringing the right people into your working group or your team when you need them. So you're not bringing in someone that's really, really useful right at the end when they could have been really useful at the start and saved you, weeks of time.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that idea. It's such a simple one, but like you say, this idea of scoring how influential they are, how interested they are,
Mm.
what's their role or relation to it. Because, like you say, different people can only give us a finite amount of time. So if this person only has 15 minutes to dedicate to this, but they are really important in the process, like use that 15 minutes as much as possible. Or
Yeah.
you don't want other people to think you're wasting their time. So make sure you bring them at the point they can actually add value, and therefore you're not just identifying your stakeholders. I like the nuance there because vested interest is vague and we want to deal in, I guess, in clear terms. So how interested are they? To what extent? How should they be involved? And I think knowing that at the start of a project is where a lot of people in any project miss a real step because they just go, well, these are all the people we need to have involved. You end up with all these calls where everyone sits on it and says nothing, and 5 calls later is actually the one where you want them to be participating, but they're thinking, oh, well, all the other 5 calls in this process, I had nothing to say, so I'm not going to prepare.
Yeah,
I'm not going to turn up engaged. So that's a real
absolutely.
clear step. Yeah.
And we've got and I think I showed it to you as well. We have a product canvas that we have at the start of the process that it's at the start because we want to show it to people up top, but it's something that we encourage people to use as often as possible throughout the process of creating something. So right when they're at the start of, is this even a problem, all the way through to we've got something ready to go. Because that is where, as you say, if someone's only got 15 minutes, or if you're sitting on calls thinking, why am I even here? This is the best time to go. This is a summary of where we are right now. And this is the story we've got to so far, or this is the part of the story we've got to so far. And that will change over time. Your stakeholder that might not be particularly useful for you on project A could be the best person to use on project B. So it's making sure that you're being respectful of their time and also your own, and ultimately you're doing this for the benefit of the product you're creating, or the product or service or the experience, whatever it's going to be. It needs to be something that is always tied back to, will it solve the problem? Will it support the business? Will it support the end users? If it doesn't do one of those things, you're probably doing something not quite right. But it can always be tweaked. But it's having that level of self-awareness to go, where do I down tools? Where do I pivot? So yeah.
Yeah. What you made me think about there as well is often a big hurdle people face is, well, no one is bought into this thing. And if we do all the stuff we already spoke about so far, we communicate far better to people because we do it in context. So, for example, most people fall into this trap of creating this big, long deck about everything. And if I'm the CEO of a company, I don't necessarily have 40 minutes to look through this presentation or watch a 40-minute video of you recording it. But if you just create a 5-slide max thing, strips
Mhm.
back the context, just tells me the things I need to know, recorded a 2 minute Loom video where you explain it, then that's good. That resonates with me. And I think that comes directly from the two things, like what is really the problem? And then, like you say, asking every time, is this in service of the problem or solving it? And am I communicating it to people relate or in a relevant way to their level of interest, their level of time, how involved they can be. So
Mm.
yeah, I think it's something that people could easily overlook, but all these steps make sure we communicate more effectively, we get the buy-in we need, and then we don't also fall at that hurdle.
Absolutely. And I think just on your point about 5 slides in the Loom video, first 40 minutes of someone just going, bah, forever and more, is the really extreme version when I don't know when this started, I don't know why it's still a thing, but the one pager blows my mind. Someone's like, can you just give me a one pager? Why? Like, what you're saying to me, what I'm interpreting is you want something short and sharp, but that is never ever what anyone does. They do a one pager, it's like font size 3 because they want to cram that 40 minutes onto one page, or they don't summarize enough. And we've all done it. I'm not slagging anyone off in particular, but we've all done it. But I think again, if you bin that barrier of one pager off and just say, can you just give me something like a summary, which is where the product canvas is really useful. And what we're trying to get across to people is, if you really, really, really want to boil it down to its most component parts, it's 2 things, or 3 things ultimately. One is, what's the problem now? What does it look like when you don't have a problem? Your ideal state you want to get to. So what's happening now? And how do you know that's a problem? And how do you know it's not a problem? That's it. Like, what are you measuring that on? Is it a feeling? Is it a data point? Is it a bit of both? You tell me. Put that to one side. That's your guide. And then it's ultimately, what do I need to tell you right now? As in, if you have only got 10, 15 minutes, or if you have got a group of people on a call because for whatever reason 30 people have turned up, and you only really want 3, what is the common thing that will keep them all engaged? Or what is the thing where they can self-awareness, well, hopefully a good level of self-awareness, say, oh, this isn't for me, I'm out. Where you can just say, this is the bit we're focusing on right now. So while some of you might be really focused on a solution, some of you might be really focused on ROI, some of you might be really focused on getting some user feedback, like, yes to all of those things, but let's do them in the right order at the right time. We'll come to all of those things, but we can't jump to solution until we've done this thing. We can't analyze the data until we gather it first. So yeah, it's just trying to hold people's hand to a degree.
Yeah, but that's good. Well, we've spoke about the two main steps here. We know what the problem is now, and essentially why we know it's a problem and what it looks like when we don't have a problem. We know who is involved and affected and to what degree. So I do want to follow on from that point you made around sort of metrics and knowing we've solved the problem. You make this great point about listing out both business and user metrics. And I think, again, that's a level of nuance that feels befitting of the first 2 steps. But tell us a bit about where we start with this concept of what matters to the individual, what matters to the business, and what the metrics are. That talk to us about those 2 things.
Sure. So, shameless plug, but my company's called Two Circles Design. And the first logo I did myself, and I got someone much better to redo it. But someone said to me, it looks a bit like the MasterCard logo. It was the 2 circles, like the little Venn diagram. It wasn't great, but I loved it at the time. It's the first one. But the intention of that was, you've got the business, you've got the user, the little Venn diagram in the middle is the sweet spot, where both are happy. Because you could put out the greatest product for the user, but it's costing you millions and millions to maintain it, so your business isn't happy. Or the complete opposite, the business is really happy because the top leadership are really into that kind of thing, it's what they like doing, but then your audience is all maybe they're field based, or they're remote, or they're just overworked, they don't have time for it. So it needs to work for both. So again, with your problem, if you know what's happening now and you can define with proper data, why is that a problem? What would not a problem look like? Like, basically, either it's an evolution of that coming, maybe it's a case of we can never ever get rid of it. It's something that's maybe a regulatory thing. It pops up when it pops up. It's something out of your control. How do you reduce that? And if it is something where you genuinely think we can turn this around, we can get rid of this, it's a culture change, it's a skill thing, it's a time thing. Be realistic around how long you think you need to do that, and not everything's happening overnight. But put some metrics in. Like, I can't I can't guarantee that anything will happen if we don't know what we're starting with, because then we need to know, well, 1% better is 1% better. And in cycling terms, that's your marginal gains. If you're, what's his chops? Brailsford loves a marginal gain. And that's how they win the Tour de France, marginal gains. But in terms of learning design, you need to see, if you said 1% better, again, depending on the problem, most people will be a bit like, that's not really that much. Why am I spending all this time and effort in this? You want to see something that's a lot better, that is quantifiable. So if it's something like a behavior and it's not a monetary or time thing, again, you've got to come up with different metrics for that. You've got to come up with different ways of how you measure that in the first place, because otherwise it then becomes too subjective. So I always think a good mix of quant and qual data is a nice healthy mix of getting some content themes, some user feedback, and some hard data that you can kind of pop into Excel and play around with. But again, I think some people just run to one or the other or none at all and just go, well, we've got a solution, so that's the problem solved. And it's like, well, again, it's like running a classroom when people say, at the end of this session, you will. It's like, no. At the end of this session, you would have told me. I might have done it once in the classroom, but it doesn't mean I can do it 6 months later.
No.
You're telling me I'm going to be good at this. How are you going to measure that? You won't be there. Yeah. Give me something tangible. Give me something that can make me do it. So, very long-winded way of saying what we're doing with data is there are 2 sections on data about gathering. So it's data so where you've already mapped out, these are the problem points, these are the data points that affect that. We need to go and get the data that is on that. So if it's a case of a time thing, is there a system that's tracking time? Is there some way of tracking time in terms of project delivery that you can grab? So data points you just have to go and get them, you store them. Then it's data points you don't know. So you don't really know what you're going after. So you would probably start with data points review that, and then start to think about, do you know what, when we interviewed that guy or that group of people, when we looked at that data, we saw some trends coming up and they mentioned this particular process that hasn't come up in conversation before. We should go and look into that more. You then have your data you don't know section. You gather that, then you put them both together, then you do your analysis, and you should be able to spot trends, metrics, that kind of thing, which support your problem statement.
Yeah. So I guess it's a case of just making sure you dedicate time to having clarity on the metrics across the board, and then listing them out, mapping them out, and seeing where the two do overlap. And that's where we get that sweet spot that you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. To come back to something you mentioned earlier that's relevant here, the sort of family tree analogy, but problems are often made up of sub-problems. So the mindset of that, we just start at zero and the goal state is that we've solved this problem is often takes a long time and often isn't that simple. So I really like this idea of, bringing in the sub-problems that need to be solved and using that as a journey to reach the overall business outcome or, metric that we're trying to reach. So yeah, just tell us a bit more about this process of the sub-problems.
So the sub-problem is, like I say, it's almost like a family tree. So if you said you're an individual, and then if there's you and your partner, then you would become a component of the family tree. As in, these two people are a partnership. They've decided to have a family, so then those are their sub-problems of that component. And again, it's basically all the things that make up that component. So if I'm making sense. So so the family is only a family because there are more than just the partnership. So as an example, so we've talked earlier about cycling. So if my bike is broken, that's my main problem. That's the one thing that's stopping me going out, and also it's raining. So I'm not going out like that. But then it might be, okay, my sub-problems could be I've got a flat tire and I don't have any spare tubes and something's happening on my cassette, the little spokey bits. I'm not entirely sure what to do with that. So then my sub-problems underneath that would be I don't have the money to go to a mechanic, nor do I have the tools, nor do I have the knowledge. But I can go and get some tubes, but I need to go and drive there. So then you start to break these down and go, okay, well, what if the shop doesn't have any? What if they don't have the right size? What if I can get them, but I don't know how to fix them? I don't have the right tool, skill, or anything else like that. It's a very, very basic example, but you start to plan to the lowest common denominator of problems first. and then you start to work your way up to the top. And it feels to me like, from experience of doing this, if you cover 2/3 of the sub problems, by the time you get to that kind of boss level at the top, it's fine. It's not as scary as you originally thought.
No. And it's about spotting where the friction exists, I guess, because if I translate this into maybe like a marketing example, it'd be someone saying we need to generate more demos, right? We don't have enough people
Mm.
demoing our tool or whatever. And you just say it's not as simple as we just need to increase the number of leads, because actually it could be we have all the leads we need, we just don't convert a high enough percentage of people that come in. So then you can say, right, that's a sub problem. Or actually, we just don't get enough traffic to our website in order for it to at the current conversion rate to trickle down to enough that we
Mm.
need. So we just need more traffic. So there will be all these different sub problems. And if you know, all right, well, we're not great at converting, then you can actually help people build the skills that involve converting people
Yeah.
to the next stage. So I do think it's such a worthwhile exercise to say, what are the main sub problems, like you said, to the point of maybe 2/3 of them, but what are the main sub problems that stop us getting to the overall outcome? And I really like that framing. Last time we spoke, you told me a little bit about how small L&D teams can execute well without cutting corners. So,
Mm.
beyond sort of following the advice we spoke about so far, is there any more advice that you would give to those small L&D teams?
Absolutely. And I think it's something that larger teams could also take note of. Basically, and this is probably teaching people to suck eggs, but if you're cutting corners, unless you're lucky, you're just kicking the problem down the road. Like, you're not. You might have the odd example where you go, well, we cut a load of corners and it works. Fine, well done, but that's not the norm. Not in my experience. So I think in terms of trying to attack that, it's trying to ultimately just follow a process where you know exactly what you're doing before you do it. So I've been using this example recently about a slingshot. So um, if it feels like you are spending a long time talking and doing research and planning, that's okay. If it feels like you've been doing that for months and months and months, that's not okay. You're spending far too long. But the slingshot analogy was basically, if I had a slingshot and I just pulled it back a couple of centimeters and then let go, it's just going to fall flat on its face. It's just going to fall down. And I could do that over and over again. Just a couple of centimeters, let go. I'm never getting anywhere near my target, but I'm doing it really, really quickly, and I'm getting a result of the thing has left my slingshot, wherever it is I'm trying to fire. Whereas if I spend a little bit longer just pulling it back, taking a little bit of my time, aiming properly, and then letting go, I've only spent, in theory, a few more seconds doing that, but I've got a much better chance of hitting my target and figuring out, is the wind going to affect me? How close to the target? Is my thing heavy enough? When it lands, does it land properly? So I'm sure the people that love an analogy will know where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
But if you do that with your learning design, small teams don't need to have huge amounts of budget. They don't need to have huge amounts of time. They just need to use their time wisely. So if you're a team of 1 or 2 or 3, you don't need to be everything to everyone. You just need to trust your process and trust the fact that your input to that project is getting the foundations right. When it comes to creation and creating a really great looking product, everyone can use a pen and paper or a balsamic or XD or whatever it's going to be to create a wireframe. It's not really that complicated, and we show people how to do that in the process. But doing things like that to get something out quickly means that you don't have to upskill in 20 different areas. You can just still hone in on, what am I doing? I can just really dig down into this. And if there is more of you, great. But you probably don't need lots of people. Disperse onto other projects. Small teams can still do this. It's only when it comes to production, depending on what you're trying to produce, you might need to go elsewhere. But don't cut corners. It's just a silly idea. So if someone is trying to really hammer you, saying we need this in a week, but like, okay, I can get it to you in a week, but it's going to be it's either going to be super lo-fi, or it's going to be just a version 1, or maybe less than a version 1, because we're still doing our planning, our testing, our research. So with the process, what we're trying to do is say to people, projects that we worked on where teams were taking 6 to 12 months to create something, working with much bigger teams, external consultancies and things, we were bringing them down to about 8 to 10 weeks to create something. So And again, that first 2 weeks, 3 weeks, probably felt like we were just talking to them loads and asking lots of questions and digging around. Whereas they're used to, we go to the bigger people and they show us nice fun things straight away. And it's like, yeah, but you're still 12 months down the line and all of your budget getting something that we can do something much better in a short amount of time, purely because we're a small team, and we live and die by this. So we don't cut corners because it works to not cut corners. So yeah.
I really like the slingshot analogy. I'm also in a small team and I can relate to that because the goal isn't just to fire the thing for the sake of it or as quickly as we
Yeah.
can. And the goal isn't also to spend forever planning and waiting until the wind is perfect and
Yeah.
planning out the optimal circumference of whatever the object is for 9 months. It is to do a thing that matters, execute well on a thing that can help solve the problem, not rush it, but also not spend forever planning it. So I really do like that analogy.
Absolutely. And just on marketing, that's
Mm,
maybe not as much of a learning time, but you only really get one main chance at getting a message out when someone makes their mind up.
yeah,
With Learns On, you may have the luxury compared to marketing where you can maybe have a second crack at it.
yeah,
Pick your moments, and just think about why am I sending this to someone? Why am I asking for their time? What am I going to get out of it? What will they get out of it? Have I done enough thought on this rather than just going, well, it's ready, so let's just throw it out the window? Like, there's a lot of things I'd throw out the window, but and if it's a bad idea, that's one of them. So I'd rather keep the kind of I'm not finished yet to to myself.
yeah. No, I completely agree. Like I said very early on, Greg, this is only the first step in this, more substantial process that you
Mm.
go through, building an MVP, releasing it, then innovating and iterating. So if people want to know more about what you do and a bit more about this process, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Absolutely. LinkedIn. I'm Greg Arthur on LinkedIn and everywhere else. I've also got a website for twocirclesstudio.com. Come grab me there, and I think the link will be in the notes for this.
Yes.
And there's a contact form. You can email us, and I'll be at, I think, Learn Tech and some of the others kicking around. So come
Uh,
and find me. But yeah, what we offer is basically a full end-to-end process, but quickly, and we're aware of budgets are restricted, time is restricted, everyone wants everything now. I think the main thing for us is let's make sure we can work to what is the right thing for end users without trying to either fudge a process or do a team over. We've been a team for a number of years and we've started doing this for ourselves. So we've been through the trials and tribulations of, people just trying to rush things out, people trying to do something that works for them but not for the audience, people that won't drop their ego off at the door and kind of be aware of, also trying to be self-aware even of, if we do this, is it actually going to work? How do we know it's going to work? Am I comfortable putting out something I'm not sure about? And like I say, we've got the process, we have a studio team, so we literally go from you think you've got a problem to here's the product. We do everything, all the in between of that as well. And it's and later this year we will probably, I think I'm allowed to say this, we will probably have a course that will be going out about the experience design logbook. So we're just we're having some chats about it, but
right.
yeah, that'll be a way for people to be almost self-starting. But again, we're always around if you need the beef of the team.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, well, there's no better way to know your audience than to have been in a similar set of shoes. So I'm sure that's why the process you take people through resonates so much. And if you are listening to this before learning tech, please do come and find Greg and myself and make sure you say hello in person as well. Um,
Cool.
Greg, really appreciate your time. Like you said, the links will be in the description so people can find them there and get directly in touch with you. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Likewise.
Cool.